Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-step workshop on the telephone. This call is being recorded. Please again invite the Spirit to open our hearts, open our minds using the set-aside words. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, at this point in our journey, keeping in mind the rocket launch metaphor that Bill used and that I've reminded us of many times, a 3-stage rocket launch. That first stage was pretty straightforward, pretty easy. We read, we reflect, we make some decisions, and we say a prayer. Really, not much work. Sometimes some reflection, some writing, but very little work. Steps 1, 2, and 3. Powerlessness, a decision about what is power for me and do I need it? And what do I need? What's my concept? Step 2. And in step 3, what kind of relationship do I want to have? They're all really faith decisions, those steps 2 and 3. There's no substance, no concreteness. Faith decision. Abstract in a way. Invisible, certainly. No certitude. No feeling necessarily attached to it. You might have some personal certitude based on your own background and experience, but it's not necessary. Knowledge, certitude. And there's no necessary feeling attached to it, although Bill at the end of step 3 says you might have some sense of, and maybe an overwhelming sense of, a feeling in praying the prayer, concluding the invitation with the prayer to be in alignment, not only to express your willingness to do the work to be in alignment, steps 4 through 9, but your complete acknowledgement and consent to that your willingness and action isn't enough, that you're powerless to accomplish that, and so you're willing to be placed in alignment. Embracing that concept of willingness, my decision, my thought, my action, and grace, the X plus factor, the mystery. I can't explain it. I never have been. I never will be able to explain it. I mean, adequately, really. In any verifiable, certainly scientific way. But I observe it. I can't explain it, but I can see it in my life and in yours. And so then we move on to the second stage of the rocket launch, which is establishing a relationship with ourselves. The third stage is establishing a relationship with others. But this second stage is really identifying in ourselves what are the shadows, the clouds, the obstacles, the impediments to my relationship with power inside myself, which is in fact the obstacles to my relationship with myself. In chapter 4, step 4 in the 12 and 12, Bill calls it instincts gone awry. It gives us a real hint at, or maybe more than a hint actually, the answer to the origin of Bill's construct of the fourth step in the big book. Resentment, fear, sex. Those are the three major parts that we've looked at, each one. But when we look at the 12 and 12, he calls it instincts gone awry, and we are aware that biology, physiology, and even psychology talk about survival instincts. Fight, flight, and freeze. Fight, anger, resentment. Flight, fear, anxiety, phobias. Dishonesty, freeze, camouflage, especially as it expressed in our sexual behavior and our secrets. And in each one of those parts, resentment, fear, and sex, Bill suggests that we're powerless. In fact, he goes so far on page 66 in the heart of the resentment work to suggest we're as powerless over removing our resentments as we are over our addiction. That's very powerful. And he says it so clearly. He implies it then in the fear inventory. Oh, you can list it. You can analyze it. You can write about it. You can talk about it. And that may help. But if in the final analysis, the fear is still there, impeding the quality of your life, he suggests that we pray, assuming that we're powerless over the final stage of the removal of the impediment, the cloud. To having an effective relationship with ourselves and with the power that is deep inside ourselves, is not ourselves, but is available to us and cares about us. Those are the decisions we made in steps 2 and 3. And then the final phase, looking at our sex inventory, and we see that the 9 questions are not about sex at all. The physical act, the gender, the frequency, anything to do with actual biology. It has everything to do with psychology. What are our motives? What is the impact on other people? Sociology. Especially that 9th question, what should I have done instead? And he says, in that area, then we pray. Because we're powerless actually to identify it clearly on our own. And even if we do identify it, my suggestion was look at the answer to your question, number 9. Put it on a separate piece of paper, that answer, and at the end of writing it each time, what should I have done instead? Write out what the principle is. It'll be different. For me, fidelity, honesty, integrity, kindness, consideration, friendship. These were just revealed to me because, in fact, they are deep down inside of me. These are my values. These are my principles. I didn't know that I had them, and even if I suspected I had them, I didn't honor them. prior to 1988 in doing this work. 4 years sober. But once I saw them and the ultimate promise, in a negative sense, of going against my own principles, page 70, Bill says, we're sure to drink again. If we continue that behavior, which hurts other people, we're sure to drink again. We're sure to relapse into our addiction because we're powerless over it. And the only thing that protects us is this spiritual shield of power, our relationship with, whatever that is, our relationship with power. The spiritual shield that is the target of the rocket launch, entering into the world of the spirit, Bill says in step 10, and we're in orbit around the light. The whole point of steps 1 through 9 is the deflation of the ego at depth so that there is room for power. In another context, I heard, nature abhors, resists a vacuum. So when in fact that ego has been deflated sufficiently, then there's room for power. There's room for God. There's room for the Spirit. There's room for my true self. This final component, I put in the context of instincts gone awry, coming from the third instinct of freeze, camouflage, hiding, dishonesty, all synonyms. Survival instincts we inappropriately think are protecting us. And the truth is, when we penetrate the delusion, they're placing us in a prison. They're diminishing our humanity. They're diminishing our ability to have a relationship with ourselves. They're diminishing our ability to have a relationship with other people. They're diminishing our ability to have a relationship with power. And one of the key manifestations of that dishonesty are secrets. The final phase of my instructions on step 4 are listed in the Way of Life document, page 28. It's not in the big book, but it comes from my experience of doing the work 4 different times with 4 different mechanics, big book mechanics, step guides. They were never my sponsor. They were project managers, as I've said many times. Each one of them a different personality, each one of them with slightly different instructions. And of course, I'm different each time because there's 3 to 10 years separation in doing the step work with each of these men. But I noticed that I needed some additional instruction to complete the work of the 4th step. And this was an accumulative awareness with the experience of trying to be complete. So I indicate, take a look at these items of guilt and shame. Those words are not in the big book, but they're currently prominent words in psychology, recovery, healing, and in our 12-step culture. Guilt, that negative feeling about our behavior. Shame, a negative feeling about our very being. There's healthy guilt and shame, and there's unhealthy guilt and shame. We're talking about the unhealthy guilt and shame. Embarrassment, dishonesty. We're talking about anything that's a source of tension. Any disturbance. In fact, step 10, that's the key word, isn't it? The recap on a spot check basis, on a daily basis, during the day, during our waking hours, if we're disturbed, we use step 10. A spot check inventory, right on the spot when we're disturbed, because if we leave the disturbance, it's a cancer. It might be a minor cancer, but it will metastasize. And so we deal with the cancer immediately. And we excise it using the spiritual formula of step 10, which we looked at the beginning of our journey. For that very reason, using the tools of 10 and 11 to work the steps 1 through 9. Tools that help us access power in our journey of discovering our powerlessness. Secrets, irresponsibility in the area of financial, relationship, behavior, family, work, our life. Irresponsibility, sources of tension in us. Sources of deficiency in our role as a human being, in relationship to ourselves, in relationship to others, generally and specifically. And the 12 and 12 in step 4 talks about the 7 capital sins. That manifests Bill's relationship with Father Ed Dowling, a Jesuit priest, who was his spiritual director from 1940 to 1960 when Ed Dowling died. A Jesuit priest, clearly Catholic, a religious order called the Jesuits. And the 7 capital sins come out of the Catholic culture. I don't use them personally. Lots of people have found them very helpful. So they're here because Bill talked about them. I'm just merely suggesting that you look at it, and if it's helpful, that you use them, and if it's not, then you go past them. Reflect on each of these items and write out your thoughts, feelings, memories. Be specific. Specificity, as I mentioned, in the resentment, in the fear, in the sex, in the dishonesty. Specificity was the key to understanding our beliefs and their delusions and our motives and their corruptness, so that we can, in fact, unpack the exact nature of, the cause and condition of, which is the invitation at the beginning of the 4th step. It says, be conscious of any intuitive awareness of resistance to disclosure. If you have any shadow awareness of not wanting to disclose something for whatever reason, it doesn't matter the reason. That's something that actually needs to be disclosed, even if you've disclosed it before. So I get the question, well, I've mentioned these secrets in past 5th steps or in therapy. And I go, well, are they still a source of irritation? Are they still a source of embarrassment? Are they still a source of secret? Do you have resistance in talking about them? Then, in fact, my invitation, my suggestion is talk about them. We do not want to have any source of tension in ourselves, any source of embarrassment, any source of disturbance, discomfort, annoyance. We want to have talked about it, hopefully to have it removed, so that it doesn't create the tension that eventually grows in that cancer analogy to a point where we're separated again, blocked from the power, and we relapse. I say err on the side of maximizing rather than minimizing. Now, for you perfectionists, be careful with that one. It's not about being perfect. Human beings are material beings. Material is corruptible and never perfect. Material, anything, is never perfect. It's not a goal. In fact, Bill is so clear at the end of the list of the 12 steps on page 60. Progress is the goal, not perfection. Progress. That's why I like the dimmer switch. And it's an infinite dimmer switch, as I've indicated, because it's an infinite orbit, it's an infinite light. It's a relationship with some spirit that is infinite. We're not infinite. We're not spiritual. We're not perfect. We're human. Although you hear wonderfully in the meetings this kind of a koan. Are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience, or are we spiritual beings seeking a human experience? I took it quite seriously because it sounded pretty deep and wise. I actually didn't know the answer to it, and I reflected on it for a long time, months actually. And after doing some writing and doing some praying and doing some talking about it, I discovered my answer. Are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience, or are we spiritual beings seeking a human experience? And my answer is yes. Yep. Both. They're two sides of the same coin. In terms of spiritual as a relationship with myself, a relationship with other people, and a relationship with the universe, a relationship with life, a relationship with reality. Don't even have to call it God in terms of fourth dimensional reality, although you're welcome to, I do. But it's about reality. A relationship with myself, a relationship with other people, and a relationship with reality. And you can capitalize the reality R. I do. It's the X plus factor. I'll never explain it. I'll never comprehend it. I'll never understand it. But I embrace it and I lean into it. It's my faith decision. It is. And I can have a relationship and I can lean into it, and it will embrace me and bring me forward. Very comforting, actually. Very supportive, very reassuring. I don't know whether it's true. I act as if it is, and it seems to work, and therefore I don't care whether it's true or not. This is about rigorous honesty, about being transparent. This is about removing the sludge in us that blocks us from God. That's why I call this the Roto-Rooter. In the United States, that's a firm that does plumbing that cleans out your toilets and sewers. Just in case you missed the analogy there. And so for next week and maybe the next week after that, let's move on to assignment 18, which is about step 5, so that we understand what the big book says. We understand and read and become familiar with what the 12 and 12 says in chapter 5, step 5. As I mentioned, the 12 and 12 is a wonderful commentary on each of the steps. Very little instruction, but with 20 years of experience, Bill writes the 12 and 12. I think we need to respect it and use it as a supplement to the work we do in the big book. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.